one of the most mysterious places on Earth. An entire sovereign nation surrounded by a single city. The Vatican. For centuries, it has influenced world events, perhaps more than any other country on Earth. How could the world's smallest country wield such power? Secrets. The secrets it holds behind these very walls.
It's a secret place for many reasons, and one is that it gets up to things it doesn't want people to know about.
This is the setting for Dan Brown's best-selling book, Angels and Demons. But are dark forces trying to destroy the church, as Dan Brown suggests?
I think secret societies evolved at that time and came about through a reaction to the ominous presence of the Catholic Church.
Could an ancient cult rise again to infiltrate Vatican security and assassinate a pope?
Popes have undoubtedly been murdered.
Could this same secret society be planning to take over world governments?
The agenda of all secret societies is to rule the masses so that the masses become slaves, fodder, malleable, useful, eliminatable laboratory animals.
And does this, the dollar bill, hold the secret to a new world order?
We have New World Order right here on our dollar bills, and yet most people are unaware of this.
One person is on a mission to uncover the answers to these very questions and more that are raised in Dan Brown's frightening book. Simon Cox, along with other noted experts, are about to tell us what's fact, what's fiction, and what has yet to be revealed. Rome, once the ruler of the Western world. Today, this nation-city is both the cultural nerve center of Italy and the setting of Dan Brown's best-selling novel, Angels and Demons.
Rome is an amazing place. It's a city that is like none other than I've ever seen. It's a kind of revelation in the sense that at every turn there's something new. It's like a palimpsest, which is a manuscript in which something's been written, but it's been written over a pre-existing text that's been erased, which itself was written over a previous text that's been erased, so that it's layer upon layer, and it's that layering that is the city of Rome, endless and deep. You turn a corner, there's a modern building sitting on a Roman building, sitting on something earlier still, and at every corner, at every turn is a new discovery.
But it's not only ancient buildings which lay hidden beneath Rome's streets. In the city where Caesar was murdered, where Constantine helped engineer the emerging religion of Christianity, a new and sinister society reportedly existed. The Illuminati, the Illuminated. Dan Brown's Angels and Demons raises vital questions. Do they still exist? And if they do, who are they?
Central theme within Angels and Demons is this idea of a secret society called the Illuminati. Did they really exist? If so, what period of history? Are they still around? These are questions that are really thrown at us from the book, and Dan Brown tries to answer them by saying, yes, they're a real secret society. They still exist today. They still exert influence and pressure, just as they did through history.
Historian Simon Cox has made a career of studying the past. Now he's making a career investigating the theories behind Dan Brown's mysteries. In his newest book, Illuminating Angels and Demons, Cox finds himself on the trail of the Illuminati, much like Dan Brown's hero, and for good reason.
It's a book that deals with secret societies, with Christianity and its interaction through the ages with us as people, as man, and the idea that there may actually be some other hidden thread of knowledge, of illumination that runs through that.
In the novel, a secret society known as the Illuminati sets out to destroy the Vatican and alter the course of world events. For writer and conspiracy theorist Jim Marrs, the threat is real.
The final goal of the Illuminati is world domination. They go into great detail as to how they're going to accomplish this. They want to educate the young and convert them to their way of thinking. They want to destroy faith and confidence not only in the political systems but in religion.
Fact is slightly different really to the fiction that Dan Brown has brought forward in Angels and Demons, in so much as the Illuminati, through my research I found, did exist as a real society. In fact, there were several different versions of the Illuminati. You have Illuminati springing up in southern France, in Spain.
A look through history books shows that over the centuries, several groups have taken on this name. In Spain, they were persecuted, burned at the stake by the Catholic Church during the famous Inquisitions. But the mystery doesn't stop there.
They're disparate groups, they're not groups that are linked. And the word Illuminati, or illuminated ones, or ones who see the light, is actually, when you think about it, would be a pretty normal name for various groups who want to be enlightened. And so I think that as a coherent body of people, a coherent secret society that has lasted throughout history, stretching all the way back to Egyptian times and through to the modern era, I think it's a non-starter. I don't think you have evidence for that. However, we certainly have evidence that a group called the Illuminati, who may well have existed through to modern times, certainly started in the 1770s in Bavaria.
The Illuminati was a secret society supposedly formed in the spring of 1776 by Adam Weishaupt, who had been trained by the Jesuits.
Devin Jackson is an investigative journalist for some of the most important publications of today. He believes the name Weishaupt is no accident. Jackson suggests that the name was fictitious, part of a secret code used throughout Europe that was the beginning of a fight by elite members of science against church-sponsored governments. Even more, Jackson believes the Illuminati may have started long before Adam Weishaupt took on the name. The question raised, however, is why would such a battle even exist?
The Illuminati came into existence around the time of Galileo because of having this need to explore further and questioning things. And it was in an age of science was burgeoning and kind of busting out, literally almost, out of the confines of the Catholic Church. And so you had all these people like Galileo, and up into the 18th and 19th century, when exploration and this need for finding out things, how things worked in nature or in the universe, they just really had that need to find that out.
I think in earlier centuries the church probably was anti-science because they feared a conflict between their dogma and scientific knowledge.
Did Dan Brown have it right? Could the Illuminati still exist? Could they be trying to destroy world governments? In his investigation, Simon Cox believes the beginning of that answer lies in the very title of Dan Brown's book. A title that may lead us directly to the Illuminati.
The book Angels and Demons, I think, is titled so because what you have here in Dan Brown's estimation, I think, is the idea of the study of light and dark. And so you have this study in dualism. On the one side, we're not sure who the angels are. We're not sure whether the angels is the church or science, because this is a book about church versus science. On the other side, you have the demons. Are the demons science? Is it the church? We're unsure about this. And I think that that's the reasoning behind the title. I think it's quite a clever title to use.
Angels and Demons is a great title. It does sum up very well the duality of the book and the theme of angels that runs through it in the Bernini statues that form the clues that run throughout the book.
In Angels and Demons, the Illuminati gather in secret meeting places throughout ancient Rome. Each location anchors a surreptitious trail that Dan Brown calls the Path of Illumination. And each location is filled with Bernini's masterpieces, which allegedly hold clues to this subversive path, including his most famous work, The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. Her hand allegedly points towards this path of illumination. Surprisingly, it forms a nearly perfect cross within the city of Rome. The Illuminati's scientific beginnings, their rituals, and quest for power are closely tied to the Vatican's own shrouded history. But hidden deep within the Vatican are secret documents which reportedly could be used to destroy the Church. Has the Illuminati infiltrated the Vatican? Have they found the hidden documents? And what will happen if they, or another secret society, finds them?
The Roman Church obviously is among the richest, most powerful institutions on the earth and has been for many centuries. And that's simply because if you go back to the time of the Middle Ages, the church commanded everything.
For over 1,000 years, the Vatican influenced world events while wielding vast control over both kingdoms and royalty.
They told the kings what to do, they loaned money, they ran every facet of everyone's life. And today, of course, with the democracy, freedom springing up around the world, they have lost some of that power, but they are still a very formidable institution. One example of the power of the Roman Church is that in the 1980s, they were allowed to open an embassy in Washington, D.C., which is still there today. So we recognize the Vatican as a separate nation, a separate state, and we have diplomatic relations with it, even though to many people this flies in the face of our contention that we have separation of church and state.
The Vatican's location is a key part of Roman Catholic history, one that goes to the core of its faith.
According to Catholic and Vatican history, the bones of St. Peter are buried underneath the cupola of St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City, Rome.
But what if the Vatican is not built over the remains of St. Peter? What if something else is buried underneath its ancient floors?
This, though, is open to debate, and it is a contentious issue. Many people suggesting they're not his bones at all. Many people suggesting that they're actually the bones of an animal.
Since its founding by Constantine the Great, nearly 400 years after the death of Jesus, the Vatican has been dogged by accusations of conspiracies and cover-ups, rumors which have continued for centuries. Some of those secrets could undermine the very foundation of the Church. It is information that the Church does not want to fall into enemy hands, like the Illuminati.
We have the catacombs under the Vatican, which hardly anyone has ever been able to penetrate. All kinds of wild stories circulate about that, up to and including the possibility that they have the mummified body of Jesus, that they have lots of ancient artifacts, lots of historical objects that could point to a more honest and true understanding of human origins.
So there is that reality behind it. There is, it's a secret place. It is secret for many reasons, and one is that it gets up to things it doesn't want people to know about.
The Church believes that St. Peter was given the authority by Christ to set up his church forever because St. Peter was the first person to see the risen Christ. This is a kind of article of faith of the Catholic Church. And all you have to do is read the New Testament to discover that it's wildly untrue. The first person to see the risen Christ was actually Mary Magdalene. In fact, it's not even true that Peter was the first male disciple to see the risen Jesus. The first male disciple was John the Beloved. So what's going on there then?
For centuries, questions such as these could not be raised in large parts of the world without fear of persecution. It goes to the heart of the Church. Was St. Peter really the one chosen to start the Church? Is the Vatican the true resting place of his body? Early scientists were some of the first to question. With other religions growing in popularity, the Church had a lot at stake.
And the Catholic Church just took this position that we have to be the one faith. We can't have anybody else believing in these other gods or polytheism or some other type of god. It's got to be the Catholic Church or nothing. The Catholic Church took this position, I think, in its first maybe 400 years of existence, that they, at that time when there were also these other faiths competing for people's souls, and so to speak, that they wanted to be the one church that would dominate over all the other faiths that were out there.
Adding to the controversy is the Vatican's enormous financial wealth, and more importantly, how it was achieved.
I think the Vatican is secretive about its finances because of the controversy over how much money flows into the church. They don't want to detail how much money they have, how much money they're worth. In fact, it's really amazing, but I have found in my work as a journalist in this country that even local bishops, local priests, they only know their picture, their small piece of the puzzle. They do not have entree to general accounting numbers as to how much money or where it goes or who's getting it or anything else.
The Vatican has always been a very secretive place. There's even, well within living memory, there have been sort of great financial scandals involving the Vatican Bank and things like that.
This enormous collection of wealth has had one other unintentional consequence: making the job of Pope one of the most dangerous in the world. While Dan Brown's Angels and Demons plot revolved around the fictional assassination of a pope, his research was well based in historical fact.
Could a pope be murdered? Well, it's a question that Brown certainly brings up within Angels and Demons, and it's certainly something that undoubtedly has happened. Celestine V being a classic example, 5-inch nail in his head, maybe kind of gives that one away as a slightly suspicious circumstance.
Stephen Ostro, a professor of art history, has researched the early centuries of the Vatican, uncovering a legacy of persecution and violence.
The early popes were almost to a one martyred because they represented a tradition, a faith that was contrary to the Roman law. So if you go into St. Peter's, for example, all the piers of the main nave are adorned with portraits of the early popes, each and every one of whom was martyred for his faith. So popes have long been killed because they are not just religious but also political figures. And so, yes, there's been intrigue, yes, popes have been poisoned, murdered, martyred, but I think in the modern era, let's just say since the 17th century, it hasn't been quite so bad as it was in the early days.
The battles of the early church were over power, world domination, the same goal as other secret societies.
Scary times are good times for the church. The agenda of all secret societies that have a negative impact is to rule the masses. So that the masses become slaves. But it all starts with the idea of a few elite people looking down their noses at the rest of humanity.
This early history of the church was violent, and like other kingdoms of its time, the church hierarchy was filled with hidden agendas by groups competing for world power. A new word developed to describe the concealed schemes of this time.
Calling the church a pornocracy is an interesting use of the term. It's not a widely accepted or used term. It literally means government by harlots, by prostitutes, hence the root porno. And it specifically and historically refers to a time in the 10th century, beginning with a fairly inept pope named Sergius III, and a series of popes who ruled by less than moral means. Apparently Sergius I, for example, had a number of competing cardinals killed in order so that he could assume the papal throne. The term got applied then because of these very powerful women, members of the aristocratic noble families of Rome, who kind of held the strings on the papacy and determined who would be pope at any given point, hence the term applied then.
Much of this sordid history and internal secret battles is said to be sealed away in this building, 100 yards behind the Great Basilica on the Vatican grounds. the archives. This sprawling complex is said to house the greatest collection of sacred books and folios in the world. Some have not been seen for centuries.
The Vatican libraries extend for approximately 50 miles of books. The collection is enormous.
I've been asked what's in the secret Vatican archives, and I must say, I don't know, because they're secret, and they have been secret for so many centuries.
In Angels and Demons, Robert Langdon manages to steal a historic document from the archives that he thinks will help find the location of a kidnapped cardinal. Could such a theft be committed? Paul Williams is a theologist and one of the very few researchers ever allowed to pass through the Vatican's tight security and examine its archives.
You can't enter with a jacket. You can't enter with an attaché case. You can't even carry a fountain pen. The only thing you can take with you is a graphite pencil and a notepad. When you enter the archives, a cleric will present exactly the document that you've requested. If they've agreed to give you that document, the cleric will remain with you while you study that document. There will be porters and guards behind you, so it would be absolutely impossible to take anything out of that room. Even if you were Harry Houdini, you just can't do it.
Such close attention to security and restricted access raises the question, is the Vatican hiding something in its archives? What secrets can be found on its 50 miles of shelf space?
There are rumoured to be some fabulous documents in there about the Second World War, about the Pope's involvement, or rather the Pope's non-involvement in the Holocaust and his failure to speak out against the Holocaust.
Of course, there must be truly secret Vatican archives, because the Church dozens and dozens of other Gospels, for example, that weren't included in the New Testament, that has stuff in them that would seriously undermine the Church if people knew about it. So presumably there are an awful lot of books that certainly researchers like me would give my eye teeth to see, hidden somewhere in the Vatican.
One of the secrets that is reportedly held here comes right from the pages of Angels and Demons. Suppressed historical documents, including unpublished writings and research by early scientists. Those writings could include materials of Galileo and Copernicus. Both were considered enemies of the Church. Both were linked by Dan Brown to the Illuminati.
When Galileo made his revelation that, hey, the Earth and the Moon and all the planets revolve around the Sun, number one, this was disturbing the orthodoxy of the Roman Church, and two, they probably were afraid that this would lend a lot of support to sun worship, which is one of the oldest, most primitive religions, and one that they were trying desperately to stamp out.
I think it's interesting that within Angels and Demons, it's not made implicit, it's not made clear which one is the angel and which one's the demon.
As Dan Brown asserts in his book, even though it's fiction, to claim that Galileo and Bernini were either part of the Illuminati or Freemasons, it's not so far-fetched, I don't think. It's certainly open to possibility. There were so many groups, secret groups at that time, it was just kind of the height of secret societies throughout Europe between the 1400s to the 1800s.
There's been an age-old war between church and science. It's gone back as far as the foundation of the church itself, and I think this is something that's inevitable when you have a group, a society, like the church, like the Christian church itself, putting down tenets and dogmas and doctrines that they say are absolute, that are immovable, that are truths. And you will also have people challenging those truths.
Did the Vatican's oppression of science and knowledge spur the formation of secret societies? Is the Illuminati one of them?
Like most persecuted and suppressed organizations, the Illuminati probably did go underground.
The Illuminati appeared late in the history of Europe. But where did they really come from? Some historians theorize that the Illuminati evolved out of a once powerful and legendary organization. One that once protected the Pope, but then was destroyed by order of the Pope. The Knights Templar, warrior priests. But were they really eliminated?
The Knights Templar started out as the Order of the Poor Knights of the Temple of Solomon.
The Knights Templar were purportedly to be in possession of the Holy Grail.
It was the year 1000. The Western world believed in the legend of the Holy Grail, a cup thought to hold the blood of Christ and his power. And now, a secret society of warrior monks allegedly found the Holy Grail. Through this legend and the power it conveyed, the Knights Templar became one of the most revered and feared secret societies that ever existed.
The Knights Templar were these warrior monks, and what they did was they sometimes served as the guards for the Pope, but what they largely did was that they guarded the route, the pilgrims' route and the crusaders' route on the way down to Jerusalem.
There were only 9 of them for about 9 years, so I don't think they could have done that, at least not very efficiently. They quite clearly had another agenda. They did seem to be looking for something in the Holy Land. They were very into secret knowledge.
Even though they took a vow of poverty, the knights began accumulating more wealth than many rulers of the day. Land, money, shipping. The knights began to finance monarchies as well as the Vatican.
The Knights Templar eventually became kind of a Templar Incorporated. They started the first branch banking, which means you could deposit your gold and silver in England and expect to take it out when you go to Jerusalem, so you wouldn't have to carry it along the highways. So they became the biggest property owner in Europe. At the same time, they owned the biggest fleet.
Their vast wealth and influence made the Templars fearless and intimidating. They bowed to no king or leader, and soon, not even the Pope. Their wealth, however, might not have been their biggest threat. Historian Lynn Picknett believes the Knights may have started a new and competing religion.
Knights Templar were accused of spitting and trampling on the cross in secret ceremonies and of worshipping a bearded, severed head. And they certainly had a great reverence for John the Baptist, overtly. And what was the significance of this? We discovered that the Knights Templar, when they were in the Middle East, met a group that was known as the Church of John of the East. And it was a group called the Mandeans, who originated around Judea, Egypt, 2,000 years ago. And they were John the Baptist's followers.
The Knights might have been following a cult, sometimes called Johnites. But it's what Picknett says next that might have doomed the fearless Knights.
They rant and rave against Jesus, who they say was a false prophet, who was a schismatic from John's religion, and certainly it does seem, modern scholars have found out that it's very likely that Jesus was actually a follower, started off as a follower of John the Baptist.
Whatever the reason, the Templars soon grew more secretive, holding surreptitious meetings in hidden locations, much like Dan Brown's Path of Illumination. A growing allegiance to John the Baptist, along with their wealth and power, made the Knights the greatest threat the Vatican had ever seen.
The Knights Templar refused to acknowledge superiority of anybody. They were becoming amazingly arrogant.
They existed for about 2 centuries as an incredibly powerful, in every sense, order. And then they met with a very kind of sudden, abrupt and rather nasty end at the beginning of the 14th century when first the King of France and then the Pope turned on them.
Eventually the Templar Order became so big that they started to arouse the jealousy of the French king and also the ire of the population. They became regarded in Sir Walter Scott's term as haughty as a Templar, meaning that they just were so proud they could do anything they want, and so this aroused the people to be against them.
Question's been debated ever since exactly what the motivation for closing this order down was. The standard reason that's given is that the King of France simply wanted their money. The reasons they were given at the time for them being suppressed was that they were the heretics and blasphemers.
On October 12, 1307, the Knights Templar saw the end coming. Historians are convinced that they managed to spirit away their vast riches and collected treasure just ahead of the advancing armies of the King of France.
These wagon trains full of treasure were brought to the harbor of La Rochelle, and from there they were loaded on 17 Templar ships, which basically disappeared from history. The next day, Friday the 13th, armies of French soldiers arrested all the Templars at every temple that they could find.
And then killed them at the stake. Many were burned alive. To this day, some 700 years later, many people still fear Friday the 13th. But by 1307, when the last Grand Knight of the Templars was burned, the purge was complete. King Philip of France now had the funds to launch his war against King Edward I of England. But was the purge successful? Historical authorities like Jim Marrs think otherwise.
It wasn't very effective because the Knights Templars had plenty of warning that this was going to happen. In fact, they only rounded up a handful of them. Most of them had fled or had simply changed clothes and blended themselves into the general population.
From here, the mystery deepens. What happened to the surviving Knights Templar with their immense treasure and contempt for the Church? Did their descendants become the Illuminati?